what it is now, how they do that. But I know they do have furlough.
They call it stateside.
Yeah. Well, here again, we want to change the name for everything. Change the name, it makes a difference. Yeah. So when she would come home, however, she wasn't just lounging around, watching TV or something like that, obviously. She was going from church to church, and she was trying to drum up the importance of these missions, not just China, but everywhere, but specifically China. And when she went to China, she immersed herself in the Chinese culture and dress. So that's the clothes she had. And so she came back and would speak, at churches. And one night, this man, that during the question and answer session, he stood up and he said, "Miss Moon, I don't really think a single woman should be on the mission field." And you can imagine what people sitting there. And she says, "Well, sir, if you would like to take my place in China, I will come home and you can go over there." That was the end of that line, because he wasn't wanting to go to the mission field. He was just, yeah. So finally, China went through periods of bad times, and one of the jokes, and I'm not saying it's supposed to be funny, but this was a joke at one time, is that why do they have so few cats in China? And it's because as one's hunger increases, your devotion to your pet decreases. And so people would send food over for Lottie Moon, but she was never a big person. She was only like 4'6" or something like that. Okay, give her a couple more inches. She was short and tiny, but what she would do is there was so much hunger that she would take the food that had been sent for her and give it to Chinese people, and everything. So she was very malnourished, and it got to the point where her health was failing, and they finally convinced her to come home to America so she could survive, and so she finally agreed to do that. Yes. 4'3". Wow. So we were both over. Well, you know what Thomas Jefferson said, don't believe everything you read on the internet. So, so anyway, here she's coming home. She leaves China, and the boat gets to Tokyo, and she doesn't make it. She dies there, and she's 55 pounds or 50 pounds at her death, something like that. And so now, ordinarily at that time, it was very rare for Christians to be cremated, but the situation as it was, where was she going to be buried? So they cremated her and sent her ashes back to the Southern Baptist Convention. And so I don't know what they did with Lottie Moon's ashes, but I've read about the package when it arrived. The person didn't know what is this, and so they went in and asked somebody else, and they said, "Lottie Moon, let me tell you about Lottie Moon." Okay, and so she's a hero. There's no question. And so at her urging, the Woman's Missionary Union, the WMU, was formed in 1888, and Annie Armstrong was the first corresponding secretary of the WMU, and she was the one that suggested naming the foreign mission offering after Lottie Moon, and she became the home missions is her offering is named after Annie Armstrong. Now we don't call it the home offering anymore. We call it the North American missions. But um, and one of the things the WMU did is the missionary education for children. And so the thinking was, if you teach kids the right way when they're little, it'll get into them. And I'll have to say, it didn't me, because I was in the Royal Ambassadors, but they started even earlier than that. They must not have had this at my church, because I hadn't heard about it. They had the Sunbeam Band, and then at 9 years old, you could join RAs if you were a boy, or Girls Auxiliary GAs if you were a female in 1913, and they just pounded it into you, the importance of foreign missions. I can remember that. We heard it all the time. We heard about Lottie Moon. We heard about Annie Armstrong. We heard about all these. Yeah, and I heard somebody one time, just because I'm a defender of. I'm not saying we can have it now, but I've heard people say snide remarks about RAs. They say, well, they didn't learn Bible verses. Yes, we did. Yeah. We did. I was there. I know that they had Bible verses for us to learn every single week. Okay? You advanced from like a page to a squire to a knight based on, you had to have these requirements. You had to learn Bible verses. You had to do. Do what? You get a badge, just like. Yeah, I had all these little pins and badges. It was. And it was formed about the time of the Boy Scouts, and really there were probably about as many kids in Royal Ambassadors for a while as there were in the Boy Scouts. Of course, Boy Scouts were non-denominational. And
could the Boy Scouts have been born out of?
No, it came from the British Boy Scouts, and they kind of started close to the same time.
My grandson gets his Eagle Scout. Oh boy!
Oh really? Fantastic.
Well, my son did he was a Life Scout. He was too lazy to do his Eagle project, so.
Both my sons were that close to being Eagle Scouts. Went through a rough time. It was my fault. I didn't push them at all,
Yeah.
I kind of let it go. I had.
Yeah, I regret that too. I should have done more on that. But another thing that was really important was the idea that we need to get into the colleges, because these people are going to be leaders in their churches and in their communities. And so they formed the Baptist Student Unions. I'm sorry, it has a new name now, Baptist College Ministries, but in 1914. And they would set these up at secular schools. Of course, they couldn't be on the campus, but they would usually get them some kind of a place right off campus. And so Baptist kids would go there. And really, the BSU was very popular even with non-Baptist kids, and that's how a lot of kids became Baptists. They think these Baptists are pretty exciting. They have all these things. And I can remember we were at the BSU where I went to school at Central up in Edmond, that they had a deal. You remember the Gong Show, where they would gong? And so we had a gong show, and everybody got up and did these skits, and I had one where I was a pastor of Urban Church, Richard Hogg, I think. No, I know that's his real name, but my stage name was Richard Hogg, and so I got up there. I didn't get gonged, I didn't win, but I didn't get gonged, They.
Would you please recreate it for us?
No.
He spoke at chapel. Well, we're the same age, Steve and I are about.
Mm-hmm.
And at chapel at OBU, Richard Hogue was, and guys let lad mice He's here, people, he's trying to, he was kind of a big shot showboat guy. That mayor.
Richard Hogue?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I remember when he came to my church in Duncan, Manual Baptist, and I mean, they had these lights and everything. It's 1970, you know, I mean, it was that deal. And but anyway, the BSU that's still around, and it does a lot of good, and so on.
We support, our church supports the BCM.
Yes, I think that's something that the churches in Norman should do. You know,
I think they do.
Yeah.
How many Southern Baptist churches are in Norman?
In Norman, a dozen maybe.
Huh.
I think there's like 72 in the association, but I don't know how. I'd have to sit here and think. There's First, and there's Bethel, and there's Trinity, and there's Northeast, and I don't think Berry Road exists anymore. It went a different route, and then Emmanuel. That's 5, and then there's Brookhaven. That'd be 6.
Heaven Bound Church, is that a?
No, I don't know what that is.
That's Pentecostal.
So maybe
They're
I can't think of any more than that.
Heaven Bound over on.
Yeah.
They're. I think they're United Pentecostal, but they are definitely Pentecostal. Sorry.
Okay. So anyway, yes. So at least a half dozen in Norman.
More than that. Next time you see Preston, ask him.
Yeah, he should know. But now, after before the Civil War, when the Baptists split into the Northern Baptists and the Southern Baptists, and it stayed that way. And one of the agreements that was reached in 1845 is we won't play on your playground if you don't play on ours. In other words, there were certain geographical areas where we would not plant mission churches, and they wouldn't plant either. But then towards the end of the 19th century, there was a problem because, as I alluded to, there was devastation economically in the South, and people were looking for jobs. And the first place it became a problem was Ohio, because people would just simply cross the Ohio River from Kentucky. And so they were Southern Baptists, and they wanted to stay Southern Baptists. They didn't want to go to a Northern Baptist church, partly because by that time the Northern Baptists had been kind of caught up in more modernist type. They were kind of drifting by all that. And so the decision was made that we would go ahead and plant churches if that people would we were, you know, and of course today we're in all 50 states, but that whole thing doesn't care anymore. Considered probably the biggest battleground, if you will, between Southern Baptists and Northern Baptists was Oklahoma, Indian Territory, because the people that you had that came here, you had people that came from the South, you had people that came from the North. You know, everybody was coming to Oklahoma because it was the land of promise. That's what they was sold as, and so for a while it wasn't quite clear whether Oklahoma Baptist churches were going to be Southern Baptists or Northern Baptists. Eventually, the Southern Baptists kind of won out, and so in 1906 they formed the Baptist General Convention of Oklahoma, and that associated with the Southern Baptist Convention in 1914. I'm sorry, Baptist General Convention, the name has been changed to what, Oklahoma Baptist or? Do you see a theme here about changing the name? Yeah. Yes, sir.
In 1906, was it established as a Southern Baptist Convention, or was it established
No.
as a Baptist Convention?
it was established as the Baptist General Convention was formed in 19. I guess I need to make that point. When the Baptist General Convention of Oklahoma was formed in 1906, it was some churches in it were associated with the SBC and some with the Northern Brethren. And then in 1914, it just flipped over. The Southern Baptists were so much stronger.
And this is established in Oklahoma in 1906
No,
specifically?
they joined the Southern, became the Baptist General Convention became part of the Southern Baptist Convention in
When we say
1914.
convention, some kind of geographical area, like Oklahoma or Texas.
Oh, I'm thinking of when everybody got together once a year.
Well,
I'm
it's
right.
it's
Oh, I'm right.
it's both the name of the denomination and the name of the annual meeting.
And yeah, it's both.
It's both.
It's tricky.
I'll wait till they change the name.
Okay. Well, Southern Baptists had survived the divisions of the 19th century, Campbellism, and of course the hyper Calvinism and all that sort of thing. But now we have more divisions as we get into the 20th century, and there was a liberal fundamentalist controversy, and what we mean by that is by the 1920s, many it wasn't the denominations in general were going through this. The Presbyterians, the Methodists, that there were elements in those denominations that were denying the inerrancy of the Bible and that sort of thing, and some other fundamental beliefs. And so that's where we came up with the term fundamentalists. What it originally meant was basic beliefs of Christianity: the virgin birth, the vicarious atonement, the second coming, those kind of, just the basics, the fundamentals. And so, and of course, over time, the term fundamentalist came to be associated more with a lot of things like you can't do this and can't do that, no open-toed shoes for women in church, that might get guys excited, I guess, or something. I don't know what it was. But one of the figures that was really important in this was the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Fort Worth, J. Frank Norris. And J. Frank Norris, he was an important figure in Southern Baptists. He got the Southwestern Baptist Seminary moved from Waco to Fort Worth, and he had a lot of clout with the seminary. But then he came to believe that you shouldn't use the Sunday. He was kind of opposed to the Sunday school board putting out literature. Now, my only complaint with the literature we get from the Sunday school board is that they decide to skip chapters out of the Bible. I don't know why they do that, but it's quality stuff. Yeah.
They set it up because they've only got so many cover a book. So that's why they skip a chapter. On Stephen's stoning, death, they skip that whole chapter.
I know that. It just took the heart out of the book of Acts, but
they've only got a certain amount of time to
7-year rotation.
cover a certain.
So they got to cover everything in 7 years.
That's what Ed was telling me.
yeah. So he began to say that the Southern Baptist Convention should not even be putting out Sunday school literature, that each church should compile its own literature. Now, the reason that the Sunday school board was formed and they started putting out literature was that that's kind of difficult for all these little churches to come up with their own literature. Now, who's going to do it in the church, and of course, we've always been congregation oriented, and that would be a lot of work, even if pastor should do it. It would be a lot of work to come up with literature, for the whole thing. But he formed an organization called the Baptist Bible Union of America. And eventually he splits from the Southern Baptist Convention, and he takes a fair number, not a huge number, but a fair number of churches with him. Now, they came to be popularly known as Bible Baptists because their only literature, they said, would be the Bible itself. So you may have heard of Bible Baptists and so on. Now, he was, in addition to that, there are a couple other things I want to tell you about him. He was kind of sensationalistic. He would, back at that time, people read the newspaper. Y'all have heard of newspapers, and so he would have these articles in the newspaper, and people read them. That he was really, and he said, "This Sunday, I'm going to preach on a prominent man in Fort Worth who's cheating on his wife." And you wouldn't believe the crowd that showed up to hear who this was. And he talked about it, but he didn't say who it was.
Oh, well,
And he would do things like that. And so he had a little bit. He'd had a little bit of a controversy with the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Dallas, George Truett, and everything. But he eventually leaves. Now, but I will say this: he was missionary minded. He was not a Calvinist, that type of Calvinist anyway. And so he had to kind of start here again. Their missionaries, what they did is they would have to go around to churches and get their support. Okay. J. Frank Norris. So Bible Baptists would do that. And there was a kid in Georgia, and I'm just going to give you his an example, whose family became Southern Baptists when they moved to Georgia. And he went to Mercer, this boy, and he was pretty conservative boy, and he challenged the professors as being too liberal and all this kind of stuff. Now, later in life, he said, I think I went overboard, with that on those things. But anyway, he was a protege of J. Frank Norris, and so J. Frank Norris talked to him about being a missionary to China. And so he wound up being and his name was John Birch. Now, I'm going to tell you what he did that was really important. Yeah, this is named after him. What he did is World War II. Y'all have heard of it. It was in all the papers at the time. But in World War II, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and people wanted to strike back. And so they finally came up with the idea of a raid on Tokyo, which was thought to be impossible in April 1942. So they had Jimmy Doolittle was the man placed in command of this effort. And they told him this is a possible suicide mission because we can't put enough gasoline in those airplanes to make it all the way into China, possibly. We don't know whether you can make it. And some of them got shot down. Some of them crashed. Some of them made it all in the ocean. Some of them made it to China, but they landed where the Japanese had control there in China. And then some of them got beyond the Japanese lines. And one of them who got beyond was Jimmy Doolittle. But the Japanese were looking for him. And they were hiding in a hollow log. And so some Chinese told John Birch, he'd been there for a few years, as a missionary. And so he went and found them, and then he took them to a hiding place. So he probably saved Jimmy Doolittle's life. Okay. And so anyway, that was, now at the end of the war, so what happened, they asked if he could be an intelligence officer, which he did, and he got really commended by Claire Chennault, who was the top airman over that area at that time, Army Air Corps. And but the Chinese, communist Chinese, remember there was a civil war going on between the communist Chinese and the nationalists, and the communist Chinese murdered him. So in 1945. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting story about that, and you may not believe this, but the United States government covered that up, that one of our guys had been murdered by the Chinese communists, and it was kept secret for several years before it was revealed. It was quite a scandal at the time, when it turned out. J. Frank Norris. So one of the things that he probably did is he probably contributed to the decision to adopt a Baptist faith and message in 1925 to clarify SBC theological positions. It was revised 1963, 1999, 2000. I think it's been revised since then. But just little, tweaking it and everything. But if you read the Baptist Faith and Message, they try to avoid things that are divisive in Southern, things that we all agree on, pretty much overwhelming, like that are Baptist distinctives, like immersion, believer's baptism, eternal security of the believer, that type of stuff. It's in there, and all that. But when it comes to eschatology, here's what it says: something like, God in his own way and his own time will bring an end to everything with the second coming of Jesus Christ. Okay, so that's something that's an umbrella everybody can get under. Yeah, regardless, we all agree on that. Then there was a Ralph Elliott controversy in 1962. The Broadman Bible and the Broadman Bible Commentary in 1961, and the Broadman Bible Commentary, it didn't make it past the first volume of Genesis because the person that they picked to do that, he took issue with the historicity of the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. And that didn't go over too well in Southern Baptists. And so that was the end of the Broadman Bible Commentary. It was supposed to be on the whole Bible, but it didn't make it past. Eventually, it did.
They revised, I have the revised
Of the Genesis? Okay. So they took a few things out that the first guy had put in, and so anyway, the next division, I've never looked at it.
I think we have a copy in the library.
Okay. The seminaries. Now, here's another thing that Southern Baptists do is, I think it's like 6 seminaries. You have one in California and one in Kansas City, Fort Worth, New Orleans, North Carolina, and Louisville. Those are the 6, and the first one was in Louisville. It actually was located elsewhere, but it moved to Louisville after the Civil War. But in these seminaries then gave better training to ministers. That was the idea behind it. And I'll tell you what these 6 seminaries, this is one reason that some people go, well, if Southern Baptists get too liberal, I'll go somewhere else. And I thought, well, what are you going to do about the seminaries? I'm not prepared to just give up. What people, after the Civil War, they scrimped and saved to start the seminary, to fund those seminaries. I found a will one time in Tennessee where these people had given practically their whole estate to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And, you know, I feel like an obligation to people that do things like that. But, so the big issue was the inerrancy of Scripture, that the Scripture is without error. And so what you had was that how did you get to be in the seminary, you know, a president of the seminary and everything, like each one had its board. And one of the things Southern Baptists have done is we set up a lot of boards and commissions, okay? And they run the seminaries, or they run the foreign mission board, or they run this or that. And so the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, he'll appoint people to these positions, and then they do this, and one president can't make a whole lot of difference. You follow what I'm saying? I mean, you get to make some appointments. But what had happened is a lot of the more conservative pastors had not paid much attention to what was going on. And like W.A. Criswell said, he had failed the Southern Baptist Convention his 2 years. You know what he did on the appointments? He just turned it over to somebody to come up with names. And so what you had, and my brother was in seminary at Fort Worth in the late 70s, and he's told me the stories about he said some of the professors were as good as gold, you know, but some of them weren't. And so it was kind of that deal. So there was a layman by the name of Paul Pressler in Texas, and Paige Patterson. Paul Pressler? Yeah. He was just like a local state judge, wasn't he? Okay. But Paige Patterson was a scholar, and eventually he was president of Southwestern, I think, seminary. But they came up with a conservative strategy, and the strategy was to elect conservative presidents who would then use their appointive powers, and it would take several years before it's like turning a big old ship around at sea, was their analogy. I think the first one was Adrian Rogers was the first, and it just continued with men like Charles Stanley, and Jimmy Draper, and Bailey Smith, who was at First Southern, you know, in Dell City. And after about 10 years, they had won. They had routed the people at these, you know, they were gone. Now, one of the things that was happening at the seminaries is the people who were kind of being routed, they were saying, well, you shouldn't be, you know, trying to inject certain views and all that. Guess what they had been doing for years? They'd been doing that, you know, and it had become very difficult to become a professor at some of these seminaries if you took an inerrantist view of the Bible. So.
My seminary, they fired a bunch of people in Southern, and they all came to Midwestern, where I went.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of very liberal professors. One of my New Testament professors didn't believe Paul wrote the pastorals. My Old Testament professor didn't believe first 11 chapters of Genesis. Had very liberal professors.
Yeah.
Took time. There's a couple of them I don't know.
Doesn't that mess up your thinking?
No, it made me worse. Yeah, at the time, my seminary was liberal. I came out more conservative. Because either God's word or it's not, right? And they didn't make sense. One of the New Testament professors wore a leisure suit.
I had one of those leisure suits. I had white belt and white shoes. I looked sharp. But we'll move on here. So some people didn't much care for it. This conservative resurgence, as they called it, and they formed the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, and that broke away. I don't think it was a big deal for a while, but I don't hardly ever see a CBF church anymore.
Oklahoma is really fun. I mean, it was pretty strong in Oklahoma
Yeah.
for a while.
Yeah.
And all that leadership of that time has passed on, and there hasn't been new young leaders.
Yeah.
Not in Oklahoma.
Another thing that's been a resurgence is Calvinism within the SBC. That's kind of an issue. Is that churches sometimes have split over that issue. No rigid view on eschatology, as I said, in the Southern Baptist Convention. I have my view, and some other people have their view. But I think all true believers should believe in the physical, future, literal return of Jesus Christ to the earth. You know, if you don't believe in that, I mean, what's the deal? I don't know. Do I?
Basically, we kind of all believe that Christ is our Savior.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, on this is that you remember that each congregation runs its own stuff, and there were all these different things going on in the 1800s, and so you had we're going to talk about it, post-millennialism, really, and dispensational premillennialism was really big, and so you got all this going on at the same time. And so what are you going to do? You're either going to agree to disagree or split. And most people felt like it was not important enough to split over. You know, it's not as long as you believe in the second coming of Christ. Most churches have at least one pastor and a plurality of deacons, and that's generally the structure. Yeah.
My understanding is what I understood, that the Southern Baptist Church was at the very, very beginning, there was no blacks that were in the Southern Baptist Church. I don't know where I heard that.
Well, that's incorrect.
SBC,
Uh,
Southern Baptist Church was mostly all white churches. There was no integration of black people that were in Southern Baptist when it first started.
I think the week that you missed is when I covered that. So I'll just quickly say there was no segregation.
Oh no, because I missed
Okay.
that week too.
I'll wait until everybody finishes it. There was no segregation per se in Southern Baptist Convention. You had blacks and whites together, and then you have the Civil War. And after the Civil War, once black former slaves became free, they wanted to have some say. And of course, the prejudice of the day, they didn't really want to give, the white didn't want to give them much say. So they were the ones that left. I'm not blaming them. I'm not criticizing anybody in that situation. And I think, as I said, many of the white churches moved to a new building and gave their old building to the black congregation. But I will say that it was as much the preference of the black Baptists as it was the white Baptists to be segregated. And they didn't, it's not that you had a situation where black Baptists were wanting to join a Southern Baptist church. That just didn't happen. That would just been an odd situation because, at that day and time.
I might have misunderstood, but I thought the Civil War is what split into Northern Baptist, Southern
They
Baptist.
split. We covered that. Like about 16 years before the Civil War, they split.
Oh, 16 years before.
They split over the issue of can a person who owns slaves sit on the foreign mission board or be a foreign missionary. And so the tensions were building, and so the Georgia Brethren decided to push the issue and put forward a guy to be a foreign missionary. And the Foreign Mission Board rejected him. Now, their argument was that this wasn't a sincere effort. They were just wanting to challenge the Northerners to make them, capitulate on this. So the split came about because of both sides, really.
Because it would make sense that no blacks allowed in the Southern Baptist Church during the Civil War period. I mean, if that's what split it, but I mean,
But they were.
How much did Reconstruction affect?
I think greatly.
Why am I thinking that? I don't remember.
Well, because got to remember, there were like 180,000 black men that served in the Union Army. There were also black men that were in the Confederate Army, which I'm not going to get into all that, but but they weren't very popular when they came marching home to Georgia and Alabama. Okay, that was one. And so you couldn't strike back at the Union Army that was occupying the South, but you could strike back at blacks who were allied with the Republican Party. Okay, the Republican Party in the South after Reconstruction was just a shell, and blacks were Republicans, but they generally couldn't vote. They put up obstacles to them voting, and so on. And the reason, so the Democrats didn't want blacks to vote. The Republicans wanted them to vote because they would vote Republican.
Funny how they keep forgetting that.
So I mean, that's kind of the story of that. But anyway, a cooperative program. Weekly giving to the convention work began in 1925, principally to support foreign missions. With the today it's called the International Mission Board, and the North American Mission Board replaced the Home Mission Board. But the cooperative program also supports the seminaries. And one thing I wanted to say about the seminaries is there are a lot of people that aren't Southern Baptists go to Southern Baptist seminaries. I teach at this Free Will Baptist school. Everybody, just without exception, that's a Free Will Baptist that went to a seminary, they went to a Southern Baptist seminary. They don't have one. Yeah, I mean, what other seminary are they going to go? There are a few, but
it's the best bang for your theological buck. How about that?
Yeah.
Why would a seminary teaching God's word? Why would they, like the liberal professors, why would they even let them teach there?
Well, the people that were doing the hiring, they get in. I don't know what it is, but these people always squirrel their way to the top. Huh?
You can't make it in churches. Guys,
can't see
Okay,
a German
so-
as a liberal.
So, your money that goes to the cooperative program helps support 6 theological seminaries, which has an impact not only on Southern Baptist churches, but a lot of other preachers of other denominations. So I think it's a good investment.
Like disciple of Christ, a lot of disciple of Christ get there.
So other work,
Talking about not the actual disciples.
y'all may have heard of bookstores. That's where they have books. And I know that many people don't believe in books anymore, but yeah, they have. But the Baptist bookstores were all over the place, and you could go get books, but you could also get like stuff for the Lord's Supper, and all that. Now they've changed the name. They changed the name to Lifeway. And yeah, Lifeway, and I don't know if they have any Baptist books. Lifeway, you can go online and everything. But I like to go in a bookstore and look at books, but before I buy it, Well, you can go on Amazon. I said, yeah, I could go on Amazon, but I don't know enough about the book. I kind of like to skim through it and see if this is worthwhile to have. But that's the way it is. That's the way.
Completely off topic. There is a new bookstore in Sooner Mall.
Yeah, I saw that the other day.
It's all the books from St. George's in Shawnee.
Yeah, St. Gregory's, you mean?
Yeah, that one
Yeah.
too. St. Gregory's. It's all of their library, it looks like. And they're selling it there. So a really interesting collection. The very back is rare books. Y'all may be interested.
I went in there and I don't need more books, but I couldn't stop myself. I bought 3 books while I
Your
was
wife
in it.
yells at you too.
Yeah, I don't know where to put them all. But so let's go to page 16. We've got to keep moving on here. The annual convention is the same as the name of the denomination, but we do not have delegates because the term delegate implies that you're giving them the power to do something. And what we have is messengers because of the independent streak, that's in Southern Baptist. I got to be a messenger to the 2021 Southern Baptist Convention and in Nashville. And the SBC churches are affiliated in local associations, state conventions, as well as the SBC. Now, so in other words, what I'm saying is, you could go out here and start a church and become affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention. You don't necessarily have to be in the local association or the state convention. Does that make sense? Okay. Usually you are, that type of thing. But one of the things now what do associations do? Well,
Rhetorical, or
I thought you might. I know some things, but
well, they work together for training and for missions. And like our association, we do a real good job with disaster relief
mm-hmm.
and do things together that have trouble doing separately. Mostly, association is for fellowship, encouragement. Our builders call it. They go build stuff.
Yeah. The Baptist kitchens, people think, oh, the Red Cross did this, but that's Baptist kitchens most of the time that's serving them
Whenever
food.
there's a disaster, they always look for those yellow shirts.
Yeah.
Feed them, chainsaw crew.
Disaster relief.
Now
Well, associations originally were there for doctrinal, doctrinal integrity. Still, occasionally, church down line,
yeah, no longer associates with them. And you know, I've heard people say, "Well, how do you believe in local control of churches?" And then you kick them out. I said, "Well, these other churches have a right who they want to affiliate with.
Right.
You know, I mean, you can do whatever you want to do, but we don't have to be associated with it."
When there's a rip in the church,
Oh yeah,
they will go in and send somebody in there to be an arbitrator to try and sort it out.
mediator.
Dispute is.
Doesn't work, but they try. They do try, and
Remind me, who is it that would intervene?
the associational.
There's no ecclesiastical authority. So whatever you do, it's all volunteer.
Associate of.
They like we're in the Union Baptist Association, has 72 churches in Cleveland County and McLean County.
Oh, okay.
And so we associate, for, like I was saying about Royal Ambassadors had the little basketball league. That was an associational thing that organized that. I mean, it's kind of hard to.
Preston Collins, who's a member of our church, the husband of Jan, our piano player, he is the head of the.
Yeah, he's the director. I've called him the bishop a few times, and he's
Like yesterday, we
just a
were on
joke.
the budget, and we have money that we do together to train young pastors to help people go to seminary. Pastor Lee, we do cooperative things together that we couldn't do by ourselves. So, we bond together. Baptist term is like faith and practice. Our faith is the same and our practice is the same.
You said Union Bible.
That's the magic
Yeah.
term.
Union Baptist.
And one of the things is, you know, we've always had a fairly mobile society in the United States, and so people move. And so what they, let's say you come here from Mississippi and you go to Arkansas, okay, and you're in a Southern Baptist church in Mississippi back in the 1800s. Before they would accept you as a member, you have been baptized and expressed your, you know, faith in Christ and so on. And so one of the things that was common is you would bring a letter from the church that you're leaving, and they would write out, "Oh, this Dennis he's a fine Christian man," and all this kind of stuff. And you would people would literally bring the letter. Okay, now sometimes they would get off and they go, "Sally, we forgot to get that letter at the church." So when they would get there, Brad, you join, okay? So you join this church, and you say, "Well, are you coming to trust Christ as your Savior?" So I did that back in Mississippi. He says, "Well, did you join? Were you a member of a Southern Baptist church?" "Yes, I sure was." It says, "Well, you have your letter?" "No." Well, so they would accept you how? On promise of a letter. And so the church in Arkansas would mail to the church in Mississippi and ask for a letter.
Confirmation.
Maybe not moved from Cheyenne, one by promise of a letter. Wrote Cheyenne saying Dennis and my former secretary a letter card saying Dennis.
Yeah. And so then, of course, the question comes up, what if it's just another kind of Baptist? You know, of course, decisions have to be made. You know, most Baptist churches that aren't Southern Baptist, they would be accepted by statement, you know, or a letter, you know.
I turned down a letter before.
Really?
I had. Say they were in good standing. Well, they weren't.
You're saying people would lie in a letter?
No, I'm saying the request for letter came,
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Oh.
There were some moral
Yeah.
issues. They weren't.
You wouldn't grant the letter. Okay.
Is that when you have one of those, I'm only telling you this because I need you to pray with me about it?
No,
Situation.
But, okay, so we have 13 million, approximately 40,000 churches, 1,200 local associations, 41 state conventions. I say we're on 50 states because some states, like North and South Dakota, don't have enough Southern Baptists to have their own, so they join together. They sends out thousands of missionaries. Baptisms have declined, and people like to point that out. Every church has declined. But Baptists have declined less than Methodists, Episcopalians.
Is it just that we as Christians have gotten lazy, or?
There's a lot of reasons for that. Our culture, people don't join things like they used to. They don't want to get out of their house.
Just seems odd
That's
to
part
me.
of it. There's a lot of things. It's the culture is so anti-Christian, and a lot of the people that would be coming to this church or another Southern Baptist church, they're going to Life Church or they're going to TV, or this is the church of the What's Happening Now or something, or something like that. And so they can have their latte while they get entertained. And I'm interjecting some of my opinions here. Okay,
That ain't an opinion, that's true.
now let's go to non-Baptist American Christianity. The rise of the Sunday school was in England in the 1750s. Samuel Slater, who was an English immigrant, introduced this in his textile mills in Rhode Island. A Baptist layman by the name of B.F. Jacobs developed the Uniform Lesson Plan by the 1800s. And since that time, it is estimated around 80% of all new church members are introduced to the church through Sunday school. One of the biggest things that brings people in is Vacation Bible School, which is kind of an extension of Sunday school, on its. And then the Nazarene Church branched out of Methodism because they thought the Methodists were not as holiness as they once were. The Unitarians denied the Trinity and taught the perfectibility of man. You may have heard of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. They were both Unitarians. They eventually, now when they first started, they accepted most of the doctrines of the Christian faith, except they did not believe in the Trinity. They didn't believe in the full equality of Jesus with the Father. They were Unitarians instead of Trinitarians. But they have degenerated, and now they're the Unitarian Universalists, and they believe everybody's going to heaven, basically, if there is one. And so you don't want to get too dogmatic about these things, I guess. But Ralph Waldo Emerson, he would give sermons like on things like water, which is an interesting thing. Water is probably, we need to have it, but it wouldn't be anything out of the Bible. It'd just be.
You think that would lead to baptism?
Yeah. Okay, modernists. Let's look at them. They denied the historical truth of the Bible. They eventually captured Princeton Seminary. And to show you what they are like when they get in power, they're tolerant if you agree with them.
Oh, yeah.
That's their idea of tolerance. Their idea of diversity is if you're white like them, black like them, woman like them, whatever, as long as you agree with them on their positions, they believe in diversity.
Are you talking about modernists? Or
Modernists. And
Sorry,
so they captured Princeton Seminary, and they fired a guy by the name of J. Gresham Machen, who was one of the greatest Greek scholars in history of biblical Greek.
I've got a grammar book.
Well, he was something else, and so why did they fire him? Because he believed in the historicity of the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Can't do that. Can't be tolerant of that, you know. Louis Sperry Schaeffer and others founded Dallas Theological Seminary in Dallas with a strong evangelical and dispensationalist emphasis. Now, just a point about dispensationalism, I don't believe it started in the 19th century, but it certainly got strong in the 19th century.
Define dispensationalism.
Yeah.
What is your definition of dispensationalism?
Okay.
Okay, I can't bring this
Okay, we're talking when we talk about the millennium, we're talking about premillennium believes that Jesus will come back and establish the millennium before the millennium. The all-millennialists say this is more of a spiritual concept. There's not going to be a literal millennium of Christ on the earth. He's just going to come back and that's going to be all she wrote. Okay. The post-millennialists, they believe that the church is going to conquer the world, that we're in the millennium right now. And once the church conquers the world, Jesus is going to say, all right, you guys did a good job. I'm coming back.
Somehow I get the feeling Israel would look different.
Now, so where does dispensationalists fit in that? All dispensationalists are premillennial, but not all premillennial are dispensationalists. Dispensationalists, I've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to do it. All right, okay.
We can have a conversation.
We ain't got to end at 8.
So they believe, a dispensationalist believes that God has dealt with people differently at different times. They believe that it's always salvation by faith, but he dealt with Adam and Eve a certain way, and then after they fell in the Garden of Eden, he dealt with people after that, and then he has the Noahic period, and so on and so on, and so you have and so we're in the church age dispensation, which began. Some people say at Pentecost, others say, sometime before whatever it was. And it will conclude with the rapture of the church. And then we'll have the Great Tribulation. So that's where we get the pre-tribulation rapture. And then they believe after the tribulation, Jesus will return. And then we'll have the 1,000-year reign on the earth. Yes.
They believe in set periods of time. This happens. That's what dispensation means. Different periods, correct?
But
Is that
yes, at some point I would like to do a class on all of this because it's very difficult to say all of this in just a few words. Okay.
I'm free next Wednesday.
Now, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what I've read. I've seen them say that is not their belief. I have Schofield Bible in my house. He was. And he popularized this viewpoint probably more than any other single person.
what it's all about?
Classical premillennialists, or sometimes they call it. Okay, now, like I said, we'll talk about that. But what I'm looking at the history here. Cyrus Schofield, he was kind of a scoundrel, and he left his wife and his children. He was a drunk, but he got saved. Okay, and one of the things Schofield always liked to do, even as a kid, is he liked to classify things and gather, and so he decided to do this reference Bible, and it's really the first reference Bible, and it popularized the dispensational premillennial viewpoint. Okay, and many people, because he has all these notes, unfortunately, some people take that as scripture because there's a note in a Bible. I had a Sunday school class here one time where I was teaching, and this woman goes, well, it says here, blah, 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 blah. And I was looking, trying to figure out where she was. I said, what verse? She goes, well, it's over here to the side. And I said, well, that's commentary. That's not the Bible. And she says, well, it's in my Bible. Now, so I caution you, just because there's a commentary doesn't mean that's part of Scripture. And Cyrus Scofield, he was very much opposed to the modernist stuff that was going on and so on. He was in with Dwight L. Moody, who he had efforts to reach the urban unchurched with the YMCA. He was going to use the YMCA for that. Because you remember, we had all these immigrants coming in, and they were unchurched, and you got these cities growing like New York City and Chicago and stuff. And these kids were like wild animals running around, had these gangs of New York and all this kind of stuff. And so he thought if you could get them into the YMCA, let them run off some of that energy playing basketball and swimming and all this, you can teach the gospel to them. And so Dwight L. Moody was very successful with that. Billy Sunday was a popular evangelist at the end of the 19th, early part of the 20th century. He is a professional baseball player. And he's good. And when he retired, he became an evangelist. And the closest thing I could compare him to would be George Whitefield, stylistic, because he put on a show. Okay, he would rent out these like theaters, auditoriums, and you hear Billy Sunday's coming to town, you want to go because this guy's putting on a show. And also, he was a former baseball player. Baseball was really it was the number one sport at the time. Okay, most popular sport, spectator sport, and so that you'd be sitting there waiting for the thing to start, and the stage would be up there, and all of a sudden here Billy Sunday would be running from the side. He'd be running, and he would slide into the pulpit, and everybody wanted to see that, and he'd jump up and he says, I'm safe. The question, are you safe? And so that would go into his sermon. And so
Brilliant.
People wanted to show up just to see him slide into the pulpit.
Was he a Yankee?
I'm not sure who he played for. I don't know. I'll have to look that up. I got a biography of him. I just haven't got around to reading it yet. Then there's Charles Grandison Finney. Now, he was a post-millennialist. And he was a northern evangelist. And he began to preach that the church should attack the evils of society as he saw them, such as slavery and drunkenness and different things like that, before Jesus would return. So he started preaching that if Jesus ain't coming back till we get rid of slavery. Okay, for example. And of course, he got a lot of amens in Massachusetts and Ohio and New York, but not so much in the South. Okay, and he was part of what is called the Second Great Awakening, and there were areas, that what they would do is they would have these protracted meetings. The preacher would come in and maybe spend a month at that church. And then when the offerings kind of started going down, they might feel the call to go somewhere else. I don't know, whatever. But they would have camp meetings. And so you'd have campsites, and people would come from miles around to hear preaching. And this would go on for a while. And if you wanted to hear, you could, all day long, they'd be preaching. You want to hear the Baptist preacher? He's going to at 9 o'clock in the morning. You want to hear the Methodist? He's at 10 o'clock. Presbyterian, he's going to be at noon. I mean, it just all day long. You had preachers. You could go.
Yeah.
So that belief, though, postmillennialism was very popular because it looked like society was, we had the missionary movement, science was, improving our life and all that. And then World War I hit. And then World War II hit. And that really did a damage to that belief that the world's getting better and better. But it doesn't look like to me it's getting better and better. So, okay. Then there's the New York Baptist preacher named William Miller. And this is, you should not set dates.
Well, you can't.
But he predicted, his study he concluded that Jesus was going to return on October the 22nd, 1844. He didn't happen. So he said, I think I made a miscalculation. He had 1 million followers. People sold their property. Now, my question is, if you really believe that Jesus is coming back, why bother to sell it? What difference does it make? And people went outside and they looked up at the sky and they waited for Jesus to return. He did. So he lost some followers. But out of that became the Seventh-day Adventist movement.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That explains.
And then the Cumberland Presbyterians, they dropped their belief in limited atonement and predestination. We've got 5 minutes. I'm going to try to finish here. Then there were what I call the Christian perversions, the Mormons. Joseph Smith said he found the gold plates of the Book of Mormon, and he had translated it with some special glasses that an angel gave him. And they eventually moved to Utah, but after Joseph Smith is murdered in Illinois.
Wasn't he also a horse thief?
I've heard that. He had the doctrines. What made him unpopular with Christians, though, was his doctrines of polygamy, and that all other churches were false, and also the fact that he denied the deity of Jesus Christ in the sense that he was equal with God. He was God's son. They also taught that Lucifer was Jesus' brother.
Yeah.
And so Brigham Young, he takes the group. They move out there to Utah. That's why.
I love them. Come on in. Let's sit down and talk about it.
The temperance movement, Lyman Beecher preached against drunkenness. And this movement did reduce alcohol consumption. It was,
The temperance.
but they had alternatives like beer and soft drinks. Thomas Jefferson had advocated drinking beer instead of hard liquor. Soft drinks like Waco, Dr. Pepper came out of Waco, and Coca-Cola in Atlanta, Georgia, and so forth. And so now people had something they could drink besides water. They didn't have to go drink hard liquor. That was the push behind that.
I understand soft drinks, but beer? I mean, I would think that would definitely fall under.
Well, my understanding is you have to drink more beer than whiskey to get drunk.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
But it still produces the same effect. You can't drink Diet Coke all day long and.
well, you not going to get drunk, but you might get
Sloshy.
other kidney problems. Catholic immigration. Now, how did this influence the United States? Well, there were a lot. One was the public school movement, because people wanted to have public schools to make Protestants out of these little Catholic kids that were coming in. And so Protestant ministers supported that. The celebration of Christmas. Christmas was no big deal in America before the Catholics came in. But the Catholics made a big deal out of Christmas. They had Christmas trees and all that kind of stuff. And kids said, Mommy, Daddy, we want to be like the Catholics, you know. And so by the end of the 19th century, majority of American homes had Christmas trees. Pentecostalism. 1899, Charles Fox Parham said the evidence of sanctification, remember that you go back to the Methodists, so they kind of came out of the Methodist deal here, was through the baptism of the Holy Spirit, which was evidenced by speaking in tongues, other languages. And so he began advocating this, but not very many people went along with him until the Azusa Street revival around 1900 in Los Angeles. And this led to the creation of new Pentecostal denominations. The largest Pentecostal denomination to come out was the Assemblies of God, formed in 1914, which kind of de-emphasized the holiness part of it a little bit. Now, the Nazarenes are holiness, but they're not Pentecostal. Assembly of God is Pentecostal, but they're not hardcore holiness. Okay, they'll do makeup and lipstick and wear their hair in a normal way and all that. The charismatic movement was the introduction of Pentecostal elements into non-Pentecostal churches, and it led to the growth of non-denominational storefront and what they call box churches. A box church is where you just have a building.
Life church, box church.
Yeah, and they don't really, Sunday school's not a big deal. They have children's church, but not really what we call Sunday school. TV and radio preachers, Jerry Falwell and the Moral Majority, Pat Robertson attempted to organize evangelical Christians to be a political force. Billy Graham became the most prominent evangelist in America in the last half of the 20th century. He burst on the national scene with the Great Los Angeles Crusade of 1949. And I wanted to at least conclude about him and to show you how what happens is that there was this man who had been influenced by Dwight L. Moody, and we talked about him, and he felt that he wanted to be a Sunday school teacher for teenage boys. Okay, so he goes to the pastor and he says, I'd like to have a Sunday school class of teenage boys. And they said, well, we already have a teacher. He said, but if you'll go out and make your own class, I will we'll do it. So he went and found these boys playing marbles. I don't know if y'all have played marbles. I always thought it was a boring game. But anyway, these boys were playing marbles, and he said, boys, would you like to be my Sunday school class? So he had 4 or 5 kids, and so he developed a pretty good Sunday school class. One of his members that grew up to be an adult led this other guy to the Lord, and that guy led Mordecai Ham to the Lord. Mordecai Ham was the preacher when Billy Graham was converted. So see how one person can make a big difference. Well, Billy Graham, he was a tent evangelist. And he went out to Los Angeles, and it just really took off. You had several prominent people got saved at this crusade, including a prominent mobster in Los Angeles got saved.
Didn't he, wasn't it supposed to be for one night and it turned out to be like a week?
Oh, I mean, it just went on and on. And then William Randolph Hearst, who owned a string of newspapers in the United States, was really impressed with Billy Graham, and he sent out a message to all his reporters at all the newspapers that he owned, Puff Graham. So they began, and almost overnight, Billy Graham was a universally known name in the United States. Now, some people would say, well, so you're saying William Randolph Hearst created Billy Graham? No, that's not what I'm saying. God will use people, they may not even be Christians, to advance his plan.
Was this the same type of domino effect that brought Oral Roberts to prominence?
I think I don't know. I guess Oral Roberts is just kind of one of those things where some people get. I don't know how he.
Roberts traveled with tents and he got into healing. By Catherine Kuhlman.
Love her.
And so he was a Methodist. Tent revivals. And Oral Roberts did a lot of stuff.
Yep.
Sorry, didn't mean to.
So that's it. That's Christian history, and
I've had more fun.
I'm worn out.
I'm gonna read all your notes.
Yeah. And history's still being made. So
I have had more fun with it.
I
so
appreciate it.
for
Thank
doing
y'all for coming.
Good listen. The church has always influenced politics.
Oh, always.
Always.
Where did we leave off?
Well, we have. I blamed World War II on the liberal German church.
Yeah.
So
Wait,
Does
what
that-
it did.
Did Nazism hurt
No,
the
what
liberal-
I think what you're saying is that Germany was probably the most Christian country in Europe, very educated, and then you had this liberalism come in, and they began to lose their. You got to have something that you have confidence in, and they lost that, so then they turned to the military, and that didn't work out, and then they turned to Adolf Hitler. You know.
they were, because they were liberal, they were also open to Darwinism. Remember the superior race?
Yeah.
All that
The
business?
master race.
Yeah.
And so,
All the Nazis were evolutionists.
and even Japan was influenced. Remember, even Japan thought they were superior race-wise. All that, I don't know.
They still believe.
Yeah.
I think Darwinism played a big part in all that.
Most certainly. And
I could literally sit here all night.
yeah, and William Jennings Bryan said in 1925, if this stuff catches on, he says, I fear what somebody will take these to the logical conclusion. And Adolf Hitler did. You know, so. If y'all want the things with notes, there they are, and you can go get them.
Pick those up tonight. I'll get them for you tomorrow. Pick them up and I'll stack them as soon as you.
Okay, if that's what if you.
want it, I don't.
I got
put 'em in your office.
yeah, I've got paper clips. I was just going to paper clip them and
I didn't know you had an
In
office
those,
here.
in those camp meetings.
my office. Yeah,
In those little camp meetings in Kentucky and Tennessee.
yeah,
One of the newspapers said there were more souls conceived than converted.
yeah. I've heard that. Well, I guess that's always been a deal.
Are you a professor over now?
Thank you,
Steve.
sir.
Thanks so much. It was good.
I was wondering if either of you have ever seen something where it starts with, I guess, Christ, and then instead of the ancestral tree, the church breaks down. Yeah.
He did a good job, but there's a, I don't know what book it's in. Anyway, there is on the church family.
Do what?
It'll only go back.
This is the
Oh,
the notes.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Constantine.
Well, Catholic Church.
They had conquered the world.
I'll hold y'all up forever.
I don't know how,
Thanks for coming.
he was talking about the one book somewhere I got, there's a thing with Brad. But he basically told you the high.
Oh, yeah. Just for me,
I only had 6 weeks, so 6 sessions.
man,
So feel like sometimes I'm doing a water hose on some of this stuff.
Billy Graham, my opinion, greatest man of the century. Says Churchill, which, but I don't know anybody.
Joel, I thought you've gone nuts there. Well, you know what Joel Osteen has to say is some of it's pretty good, but it's not. It's not really Christian. No, that's been around for a while. You had the Crystal Cathedral, and Rick Warren was influenced by Crystal Cathedral guy. What's his name?
Oh yeah, I used to watch him on
Dr.
Sunday mornings.
Something Peterson?
Yeah,
Dr.
Crystal Cathedral.
No, no.
And Rick Warren's the Saddleback guy.
I used to watch him.
Anyway.
Yeah, I can see him preaching at the pulpit
Yeah,
at the Crystal Church in Southern
and they preach
California.
this
Yeah.
health and prosperity
What's his
stuff,
name,
you
dude?
know.
Are you still teaching out at the campus?
Oh yeah,
Spit it out.
yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That takes some of your class.
So what? Well, you could if you wanted to. They take your money.
Yeah, we enjoyed it.
Southern Nazarene University still is.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Hey there, man. Oh.
All right. I was slow, I guess.
One. Get in here. Eat. Oh, from the eating.
You know, I went to that Ray Tidwell's funeral.
That'll go him.
And he had family go up there, tell stories about Ray Tidwell, because he was a pastor.
Oh, I do know him. Yeah.
Ray Tidwell. And what was funny was his,
I don't know him. I know the Gerald kid.
yeah, this was Ray Tidwell. But it was so funny, I think his grandson, he shared the gospel with everybody that he met. Do you know Christ? Do you know where you're going? You're going to heaven. Well, his son-in-law, you know,
Whew. Whew. Got my microphone.
Oh, I
Did we
gotta
ta-
put that on charge. I'm glad you said something.
Yeah. So you were shown how to do it or something?
Well, Michael was sick tonight.
Okay. Where should I put this? Up there with the.
Just give it to me. I gotta put it on charge. I didn't even stop it. We've been talking in here and broadcasting it.